And a good football Friday, a summer football Friday here on Birds 365. Everybody's taking downtime. Not your boys at Birds 365. McMullen McDonald here, present and accounted for the 550th time.
Whoa, 550. I like
nice,
those landmarks. 550. I like
nice
it.
round number for Mac and Mac here on Birds 365. We'll hang with you for the next couple hours. And we got two good guests, Philly guys, coming your way. Johnny Mac, here's where I want to start today. Not on the show, not featured on the show today, but featured often is your boy Ed Kratz, fellow scribe from Sports Illustrated, who over the last couple of days put up the most underrated Philadelphia Eagle going into the 2023 season. And there is no wrong answer here. You can debate it. You can say don't agree, but there really is no wrong answer because it's a very subjective question. And it all depends on how you define in your own mind underrated. Different people will look at that differently. Who does Johnny Mac have as the most underrated Philadelphia going into 2020?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's about, I know Ed want the more sort of under, the guys who aren't a big part of the team. So I would have kind of a different definition. Like, I think the most underrated Eagle is Josh Sweat, who's a really big part of the team. He made the Pro Bowl. And so everybody knows he's a good player. But I don't think everybody knows he's a really good player. Really, I mean, really good player. And I think from that standpoint, he's underrated. Ed went more, I think he went Jack Driscoll, number one, who's, a good player, six man, so to speak, on the offensive line, can play every position but center. So he's sort of got a different definition than me. But I think Josh Sweat is there with everybody we always talk about, obviously the quarterback and, A.J. Brown's, Avante Smith's, Dallas Goedert's. Like he's that kind of player. I don't think people look at him that way is why I put him in that category.
I like your pick. I like Ed's pick because, as I said, it all comes down to your own definition of what's underrated, starters, subs. Different people can interpret it differently. I give you the guy who I would say, even over Josh Sweat, who I think is a very good pick. I would say it's Avante Maddox because you got your three corner, you got your two outside guys, decorated, Pro Bowl, blah, blah, getting paid big bucks. Avante's in the slot. And oh, by the way, in today's NFL, slot means you're on the field about what? 85, 90% of the time. The slot corner does not come off the field very often in the NFL these days. Now, the thing working against Avante is he does get hurt and he misses games. But that helps to make the point of the most underrated player because last year when he was off the field, that meant Josiah Scott was on the field. Do I have to remind you of 3rd and 30 conversion against the Dallas Cowboys? Ouch. That one stung. Because he's in the slot, because he's not on the outside facing off against the other team's best receiver. And oh, by the way, that's one thing you'll see against the Eagles. They don't really force outside wide receivers into the slot. Some teams will do that they'll specifically pick on your slot corner if they think they get a better matchup and a guy can swing from outside to inside. They don't do that against Eagles. Why? Because Avante Maddox is that good at covering in the slot corner. It's got to stay on the field this year, got to cut down on the injuries. But I would say Avante Maddox, most underrated Philadelphia.
No, I think that's a good choice as well. I can't, he's a very good player. I think, as you pointed out, you're correct. You saw the difference when he was on the field, when he was off the field. I would add, too, that in this scheme and this philosophy that we always talk about, when we talk about we always talk about +1 on offense, the +1 on defense. That's the whole thought process of this scheme, to have the extra guy in coverage. And the most important part of all the coverage schemes is the slot corner, the nickelback. That's sort of the guy in obvious passing situations where everything is based off the coverage. So It's a really important position in this philosophy. Really important player. So, yeah, I mean, he'd be at the top of my list. I just think, you know, Josh is a little bit better at his particular position. But Avante is a very good player, and a very important player. Um, and you know, one of the weird things about Avante Maddox going all the way back to when he was a rookie and was forced to move to safety for a short term because of injuries. Everybody, well, why don't you put Avante at safety? Why don't you put Avante at safety when you have all these safety issues? Why the hell do you want to move him from slot quarter? It makes no sense to me. But I get those almost every week. You know, when we start talking about Reed Blankenship and Terrell Edmonds and Kid Sidney Brown. Well, why not put Avante Maddox? Because he's more important playing the slot. And it's a more important position in this particular defense as well, believe it or not. Even though he's on the field a little bit less in the key situations, the known pass, as Jonathan Gannon used to call it. That slot corner is really an integral piece. So he's going to play slot cornerback, and hopefully he's healthy. And the good news is, because of the added depth outside, they were able to move Zach McPherson finally in the slot. So if the injuries do pop up, I think they'll be better equipped this year to handle it, because I think Zach is a better player than Josiah Scott, but would still be a significant drop off.
Moving Avante Maddox to slot kind of follows the Jeff Stoutland line of reasoning. Why would you put two question marks out there when you could only put one? If you move Avante, and I think he'd probably be okay at safety.
Yeah, he was forced to play it last year, and he played it well. When you remember that little series when he came back and Chauncey was still hurt and Josiah was struggling, and so it became, what are we going to do at these particular positions? And they played him a little bit at safety, and he did play well. But when they were healthy, I mean, and everybody was out there, sometimes you have to do things with injuries. So, the people now, it's Nolan Smith. Well, why not put Nolan Smith at linebacker? No. Now, if you have to, you have to. When you get down to 53, if you have a couple injuries and you don't have players, then you might say, hey, you got to do it for a little while.
Right.
But no, not. You're not, especially in the off season when you have 90 players. No, you're trying to get him up, and you're trying to work on his technique and get him to be one of the best edge rushers in football long term. So that kind of stuff is short term necessity thinking. And he's done it in the past, and he's done it very well.
Avante to safety last year was because CJGJ was hurt. It wasn't like, let's try this. No, they got caught in a numbers game, and they said, well, what's the best possible scenario short term that we can fix this right here, right now? And that was it. There's trying to plan for potential problems and then being faced with those problems on the fly in the middle of a game. They're two different things.
Yeah. And we're talking, it was one game, really. He played, I'm looking at his numbers, his snap counts. He played 23 snaps at safety. So it was really one game. And it played 408 in the slot. And then a couple extra box snaps and things like that. But he could, he's probably their best safety. If you put him back there today, he'd be their best safety. But he's more important as the slot corner. So
that doesn't say much about Mr. Edmonds, Mr. Blankenship. If you're going to say that he's their best safety playing slot corner, that's not what Eagle fans want to hear.
Well, I'm just saying but he's a really good player is what I'm saying. So if you put him back there, if you had to put him back there, he'd do well. But yeah, he's more important at slot corner. And
I saw this stat somewhere today, and I'd give credit to who came up with it. Might have been Dave Zingauer and NBC Sports Philly. You mentioned that the Eagles should be better at slot corner this year if Avante Maddox, I almost moved to say when Avante Maddox gets hurt. Sorry, Avante, truth's the truth. You've had injuries every year you've been here in Philadelphia. Hopefully none and or very little amount of time spent on the sideline. You said that they've kind of committed to making Zach Mack a slot corner. That last year they had him more on the outside, didn't need him because Slay and Bradbury stayed as healthy as they did, and thought Josiah Scott was the better option at replacing him. But they're training up Zach Mack at slot corner this year. You know how many snaps Zach Mack got at slot corner last year?
I would guess 0. I'd have to look it up. I mean,
close but incorrect.
You know, if he did move in, it was probably because of motion on the other side. Just sort of not the way the Eagles play.
The answer, I'll give you the answer. The answer would be 1. Out of 250 snaps played last year, McPherson was on defense for 250 snaps. 1 was played at slot corner. That's not a lot of experience, Johnny Mac. 1 out of 250. So they've got all offseason to work it out. But then again, the Eagles don't work out much during the offseason. What makes them think that McPherson can be just a plug-and-play guy? Now, this is as a backup. We're not talking about as a starter. And hopefully Avante Maddox stays healthy and Zach Mack does a great job rooting him on from the sidelines again. But if that injury reoccurs and Zach Mack is thrown in there, what makes him think that he'll just adapt to that position?
You know, it's what you do. You evaluate players and you project players. I've been saying for years he looks like a slot corner to me. When they drafted him.
All right, so hold on. Define looks like to me.
Well, that you know, they're different positions. I think, you know, I talk all the time about you know, off-ball linebacker, Sam linebackers, even more egregious when people lump that in as linebackers. It's similarly Hassan Reddick, you know, versus TJ Edwards. Technically, they play the same position. And, you know, fans, not technically, they don't play the same position. But I'm saying when you see the term linebacker next to both of their names, you know, there's a bunch of fans. There's a lot of smart fans who understand the game that know they play different positions. But it's why you have this Nolan Smith narrative. Well, why can't he play linebacker? He's announced as a linebacker. They're 2 completely different positions. All-ball linebacker, Sam linebacker, edge rusher. Completely different positions. Not to that extent, but those are 2 completely different positions, outside corner, slot corner. And you need different traits to play in the slot, play outside. You know, inside the slot corner, they have a lot more responsibility when it comes to run support. So they got to hold up in that aspect of the game. Outside corners tend to be not very good run support, to put it mildly, especially in the modern era. They tend to be longer. They tend to be faster. They need to match up outside with the A.J. Browns of the world, who play mainly outside the numbers, receivers like that, the Mike Evanses of the world, if you think about those guys. So they tend to be longer. They tend to be faster. Inside, you need to deal with the sort of option routes. So you got to be very smart. You got to be very savvy. You have to understand a little bit more about the entire defense. When I mentioned the importance of the position that they always stress, especially in this philosophy when they play so much match zone, you got to have a better understanding of the linebackers coverage because you're in the mix with them in the middle of the field. You have all these option routes, as I mentioned. You think about the Julian Edelmans, the Wes Welkers, those types of players, Cooper Kupp in the slot, Justin Jefferson in the slot. I mean, they'll kill you with these option routes. And it's different. And that's why when people say, well, just put Slay, travel. Well, you travel them from side to side, but you're not going to put them in the slot much.
Right.
They're different positions. And
Okay. You did a great job explaining the difference between being in the slot and being outside. Maybe I didn't state the question well. What is it about Zach McPherson that you say he's better suited for the slot? Him personally, his traits, what he brings to the field. Why do you think it would work in the slot when we've seen him take exactly one snap out of 250 snaps?
well, number one, it starts with his physical traits. He's they list him at 5'11". That might be a little bit generous. I don't know, but he's from. If you look at Avante's 5'9".
Yeah, he's not big at all.
When you're under 6 feet, and not because there's a lot of guys like the kid in Seattle's like 6'4", which is ridiculous, but you got to have length to play outside for the most part. So you start with the physical traits, and that's why I said he looks like a slot cornerback to me. That's what I'm talking about. From a physical perspective, it's pretty clear the Eagles agreed. They just couldn't move him inside because they didn't have any backup outside corners. Now look at who they drafted. Calais Ringo. Fast, long, length, outside corner. They signed Greedy Williams, former second-round pick, 6'2", long, very fast, outside corner. Now they can move Zach McPherson in. It's not to do with what he's played. It's got to do with his physical traits. Is he going to live up to Avante Maddox? No. Is he better than Josiah Scott, who, by the way, Josiah Scott has the exact same measurements of Avante Maddox? It's about the physical traits of the player. And to me, Zach McPherson has always, since day one that I saw him, has always looked like a slot corner to me.
He's going to get a chance to be the backup slot corner this year, and we'll see if he can get the job done better than Josiah Scott last year. Yeah, I think he's got a pretty good chance to accomplish that. Mac guys here on Birds 365. Got two good guests coming away. The first of which is going to join us coming up in a couple of minutes. If you have had your JAKIB Media YouTube channel on today, you know who's coming up next. He's here before us here on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel. But every once in a while, we get him on and grill him. Make sure he's staying up with his Eagle knowledge. That would be one Mark Farzetta of the Fargy Show and Eagles pregame show here on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel. He joins us next on Birds 365.
Do you stream on a Roku?